Alright, good evening everyone. And today we're going to be talking about why in the modern era it's kind of impossible to actually enforce a lot of the gun control proposals, just in general, let alone in the United States, but just worldwide. And I actually have some props for today's episode. We'll get to that when I get to the end of the slideshow because I'm going to talk a little bit about how different types of guns work. Because to actually ban guns completely or even effectively regulate them, you really actually need to restrict the knowledge on not only how they work, but how to make them. And the truth is, they're stupid easy to make, even if you don't have pre-made, prefab parts. And we're going to actually start with an example of that. And, oops. There we go. And we're going to be starting with this beautiful piece of work. It's actually kind of crude, if we're honest. But this was this was a gun made by a guy in Great Britain. And the guy's name is P.A. Luty. Luty. And he made this gun as a protest of British gun control. Basically saying, guess what? I don't need any regulated part in order to make a machine gun, let alone any other type of gun. So, as you can see, it's got two receivers. There's a rear trunnion, a front trunnion. He actually made the magazine himself. The barrel isn't rifled, so it's not exactly the most accurate thing in the world. But the truth is, if you have the patience, you can actually rifle the barrel yourself. But he picked up all the parts he needed to make this gun at a hardware store. And again, like I said, he was doing this as a protest. Now, he did wind up spending the entire rest of his life in prison for making this. But the British government, the way they regulate parts is it has to be pressure bearing. So the bolt, firing pin, the barrel, and I think any other parts that are actually integral to the mechanical workings of the firearm are the regulated parts. Whereas in America, the lower receiver is considered the regulated part. Right. But this kind of goes to prove that you don't actually need a lot of... And the truth is, I could make this with a hacksaw and a file if I really wanted to, and maybe a soldering gun if I was... And some screwdrivers and all that stuff. A vice press, and the truth is, this doesn't look too difficult to make. Would it be ugly? Yeah, this isn't the prettiest thing in the world, but I could do this if I really, really felt like getting sent to prison for basically violating the National Firearms Act via the Hughes Amendment. But I'm not interested in that, so I'm not going to do it. The other problem is 3D printing. And this also goes to metal milling machines, both of which are becoming much less expensive. And given the Supreme Court case that says, yes, you can distribute CAD files for gun parts, because that is covered under the First Amendment. So you can't ban 3D printers, or I'd love to see them try to ban 3D printers, and you can't ban the sharing of the information needed to create these parts. Well, how do you keep someone from milling a block of metal into a lower receiver in the United States. Again, the regulated part. And actually, if you have a metal milling machine and a general knowledge of what you're doing, at that point, all you need is some tubes and some springs of varying sizes, and you have a fully functioning firearm. And are you really telling me that to enforce gun control, the government is going to need to ban and regulate springs and metal tubes used for plumbing or electrical equipment? Are you really telling me you want to go down that road? And here's the thing. Seriously, tell me, is that what you want, gun control advocates? Actually, now the reason why I'm showing you this is actually what an AR trigger group or an M16 trigger group looks like. Now this is for the civilian version, and what this is all the parts that you need to make a trigger group, which can be 3D printed. I wouldn't recommend 3D printing the hammer, but the safety selector can be 3D printed. The disconnector can be 3D printed. The pins can be printed. The trigger itself can be 3D printed. And the hammer, you can mill that out. I wouldn't recommend 3D printing it, but I've actually heard of it being 3D printed. Again, I wouldn't recommend it because that actually needs to be a pretty sturdy piece. And I wanted to show you the difference between an M16 trigger group and an AR-15 trigger group. And there's not a tremendous amount of difference. And actually, believe it or not, it's not illegal to own an M16 trigger group, so long as you don't have the third pinhole and the auto sear, which I'm going to show you in the next slide. Because guess what? It's perfectly legal for me to show all this to you because, number one, free speech, but also I'm using it for educational purposes. Don't go and take any of the stuff in this video and make a firearm. Actually, don't make a machine gun using it. It's actually perfectly legal for Americans to build and even design and build their own firearms, so long as they don't break NFA laws or any local laws in their jurisdiction. It's perfectly legal to do that. And this is the part that turns your weapon from, or a weapon like I've got right here, from something that is perfectly legal right now into something that, if you don't have a $200 tax stamp and a ton of paperwork and ATF approval, you're going to prison for a very long time and your dog is getting shot. And this is the auto sear. Basically, when you turn the selector to full auto, this part disengages the disconnector, if I remember correctly. So it allows the hammer to keep firing forward, striking the firing pin, and allowing more rounds to get sent downrange. And the auto sear actually pushes down on the disconnector to keep it depressed. And just to show you what I mean by how easy it is to make a gun, I'm going to show a few pictures of guns that were made in prison by prisoners who supposedly can't get anything firearms related, and yet they turned a staple gun into a gun. Again, very crude, but that's some damn ingenuity. Oh, and this is the simplest type of gun you can make that isn't a muzzle loader. And it's what's called a slam fire shotgun. Again, yes, it is very simple and crude. And actually, technically, this one counts as in any other weapon, I think. No, I don't actually know how you would regulate it with that foregrip. But yeah, that's it's and by the way, that shotgun, if you take away the furniture, that can be made in about 20 minutes. And that's not even a joke. And all you need to do is go to the hardware store, pick up like 2 tubes, a nail, and something, it's and 1 or 2 other things. Like, I kid you not, that's how easy it is to make. And I'm going to slightly blow this up. That way I can explain some of the stuff about how all this firearm stuff works with some props that I brought along. Make sure I'm not showing off serial numbers. Okay, cool. So, this is the type of gun that gun control advocates think I should have. The only type of gun I should be able to have. Or at least something similar to this. This is because this looks like it's used for hunting. And actually, that's kind of what it is. It's a lever gun. By the way, just to make sure, check the chamber. There's nothing in there. And the way these guns work is this hole right here. What you do is you put your rounds in there. And I'm going to depress the hammer. By the way, we're on safe right now. And there's a pin that lets me know. And these, actually, like a lot of guns, you actually have to be cocked. And I'm going to block that out. If you can look right here, if it's red, you're dead. So I'm going to put that back on safe. And all the safety does is that prevents the hammer from interfering with the firing pin, or more accurately, striking the firing pin. Now, the way these guns work is when you pull back the lever, it ejects the spent cartridge, right? And it loads or primes this. By the way, this is the bolt carrier. It sends this back, right? When you pull the lever forward like this. It draws around back into here. And when you pull this backwards, a new round gets chambered. Basically, the one that got pulled out of the tube. The lower tube is actually your magazine. And depending on where you live, you can have a magazine. I think some of the real early lever guns had up to 15 rounds in them. I think the first Henry rifle in 1859 had it had more than 7 or 8 rounds in it. Now, you may be wondering, well, crap, bolt-action guns in World War I, none of them had capacity of nearly that much, right? And you'd be correct. Those guns, the largest capacity I heard of was, I think, 6 or 7 rounds. And lever guns that Americans were using out west, like I said, some of them had 15-round capacities. And you're going to probably be wondering at this point, well, why didn't world's militaries use lever guns? Well, picture you sitting in the trench with this. You fire, pew. Doesn't actually take that long, and the motion doesn't. But now think about that laying down prone, right? Not going to happen. By the way, notice I'm taking very good care not to flag my audience, right? Remember, rule number 1, always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. So the next gun I'm going to show you is a standard handgun. And by the way, just to prove for the audience, checking the chamber, I have taken out the magazine as well. Safety first. And actually, I'm going to pull this back for right now. So the basic way a semi-automatic handgun works, and I'm going to do this to depress it, is the recoil from a cartridge travels out of the barrel, sending the bullet that way, right? Because all a gun is a tube with a projectile, and an explosion in this area where my finger is sends a projectile out, right? Well, as we've gotten clever, and I'm going to turn this around. There we go. As we've gotten clever, you take the bolt carrier, or the bolt, or the firing pin, bolt carrier group, whatever you want to call it, is actually attached to a slide in most semi-automatic handguns. And so what happens is the recoil sends the slide backwards. This action also ejects the spent cartridge. It also, because there's no cartridge in there, and I'm going to have to turn it around, you can look down in there, it will feed the next round as the slide comes home. The issue is, though, the hammer won't go forward if the trigger is still depressed. And to prove that, there we go. What I'm going to do is pull back here, safe, dry fire. Let's simulate that. Notice how I haven't undepressed the trigger. Hammer stays back. And this is because there is a disconnect, right? And other safety features that prevent it, and also because of the way the design works, because I don't have time to completely strip the firearm to show you why the trigger doesn't keep firing home. But that is how most semi-automatic firearms work. There may be one or two that use a slightly different motion, but those are mostly extremely archaic. Off the top of my head, the Lugers of Germany operated slightly differently, and I know the C96 Mauser operated very differently. Now we're talking about the standard C96 Mauser, not the Schnellfeuer, which was the fully automatic version of that insane gun. I would love to have one, by the way. Those are the famous broom handle pistols, or as Star Wars fans may know it, Han Solo's blaster. Anyway, so those are the types of guns that a lot of gun control advocates would say, okay, yeah, you can own those. Those are reasonable. However, this is one that a lot of gun control advocates would prefer I not have. And let me make sure serial numbers are facing me. Cool. And this is an AR, obviously. So how does this work? Well, to explain it, first, I'm actually going to have to do something very specific. And that is disassemble it. Because there's two parts you need to understand on these, right? The lower receiver, this is the regulated part, or more accurately, this part without anything else, just the bare receiver, no takedown pins, no trigger group, no disconnect, no magazine release, no safety group. Quite literally, just the receiver itself. I'm going to set this to the side. And this is the other part you need to understand, the upper receiver. Because this is a part that has the bolt carrier group, right, which is in there. Cool. So, we're going to start with the upper. And the important part about the upper that you need to know is how it works. So we explained that when you fire a gun, there is hot gas that pushes the bullet out of the barrel, right? Well, when that happens, a lot of semi-automatic rifles, they don't use the basic recoil-operated system of handguns, right? Instead, they use the gases to cycle the bolt. And that's the case here. See, in the front sight block, you have a gas port that allows gases to come up into this little part, which has a gas tube. Gas tube goes through the handguard, and I might actually... too lazy to take off the handguard on this. Gas tube, you can actually see it between this piece right here and the actual upper receiver itself, right? That sends gas into a little part of the bolt carrier group that protrudes to the end of the gas tube. Those gases are actually enough to send the bolt back into the buffer right here, which goes into the stock, and that's actually a spring that gets depressed. That spring, slams home the bolt, and if there's another round in the magazine, it will chamber that round by feeding it up and into the chamber, which is kind of a really terrible term because the chamber is really just where the bolt round, bolt cartridge and barrel meet. That's what the chamber is. But okay. So I'm going to explain the lower receiver now. So the weird thing about a lower receiver, and I'm doing this because security reasons, is that you actually can't put the gun on safe, look at that, if the gun isn't cocked. You may think, well, how is that at all safe? Well, it works, basically. And actually, periodically, you do actually have to change out trigger groups and other parts like that, because the springs do lose tension. So it is a safety feature. And the other reason why you occasionally have to replace trigger group parts is sometimes the parts wear down enough to where sometimes the disconnector doesn't do its job, and it allows the hammer to hit the bolt carrier group. Meaning you accidentally shot your gun so much that you turned your semi-automatic into a machine gun. And that's the other reason why a lot of gun control is stupid, is because sometimes parts fail. Sometimes parts wear out, and you don't know they're worn out until the issues from wear actually start to plague you. And in some semi-automatic firearms, you don't know that there's an issue until your gun sends more than one round downrange per trigger pull. Yeah, so anything else about the trigger is operated on a spring system, the disconnector is operated on a spring system, and the hammer is operated on a spring system. And they all work together, and I'll be honest, even I am still trying to figure out exactly how they all work together. Credit Eugene Stoner to the idea of how they work, because he's the one who developed the AR M16 platform. But anyway, that's actually going to wrap it up here. Because I felt like explaining how a firearm works kind of explains why gun control won't work. Or won't at least be enforceable. Because if you know how a firearm works, and you have even the most basic knowledge of mechanical engineering and physics, you can make some pretty scary stuff. And that's not even counting stuff that you can make that is far more deadly than any firearm would be. That is completely unregulated. But, grain of salt there. Anyway, take it easy, y'all. Hope you have a very nice evening. There probably won't be a stream tomorrow just because I've got a lot on my plate tomorrow. So, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Take it easy, everyone. Bye-bye.